There are moments in public life that arrive quietly, almost without announcement, and yet they linger in the imagination far longer than the noise that usually surrounds royalty. This is one of those moments, a simple family outing to Disneyland, yet it carries something far deeper than its surface suggests, something almost symbolic in the way it reflects family, freedom, and the quiet reshaping of a life once defined by global attention and expectation. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, this was not a performance, not a staged appearance, and not a carefully constructed public image. It was something far more human, a family choosing to exist in a moment of joy without explanation, without defence, and without the weight of institutional expectation pressing against every step. A family simply being a family in its most unfiltered form. And so they arrived at Disneyland with their children, Archie now 7 years old, and Lilibet just 4, walking through a space that exists entirely to hold imagination, laughter, and memory. There is something almost poetic in that contrast, a family so often discussed in the language of history and institution, stepping into a world built entirely for childhood wonder. And in that moment, titles fade into the background. What remains is presence. What remains is connection. Disneyland, often called the happiest place on earth, becomes, in this context, more than a destination. It becomes a kind of emotional landscape, a temporary escape from the constant noise of public life, where children are not defined by who their parents are, but by what they experience in the present moment. And within that landscape, Harry and Meghan are not figures under scrutiny. They are simply parents, watching, guiding, and sometimes following as their children lead them deeper into wonder. Meghan later shared glimpses of the visit through an Instagram carousel posted on May 11th, a collection of quiet moments rather than a structured announcement. There were no long captions, no detailed explanations, only images that spoke softly for themselves. And at the centre of it all, a simple heart, a gesture so minimal that it almost resists interpretation, yet somehow carries more emotional weight than paragraphs of explanation ever could. There is something intentional in that simplicity. In a world where everything is usually dissected, analysed and reframed into narrative, choosing not to explain becomes its own kind of statement. It suggests that not every moment is meant to be defended. Some are meant only to be experienced, and within those images the children become the true centre of the story. Archie and Lilibet are not framed by public identity in these moments. They are not symbols or extensions of a larger narrative. They are simply children moving through a world designed for imagination, where reality and fantasy blend together in ways that feel completely natural at their age. Little Lilibet, just 4 years old, meets Disney princesses, stepping into the presence of Cinderella and Princess Aurora from Sleeping Beauty. For her, these are not cultural icons or cinematic figures. They are real enough to touch, real enough to embrace, real enough to become part of her understanding of the world. And in that meeting, something quietly formative takes place, the kind of memory that stays not because it is grand, but because it feels effortless and pure. There is a photograph where she is seen embracing one of the characters, a simple, childlike hug that carries no awareness of audience or interpretation. It is a moment defined only by presence. And perhaps that is what makes it so powerful, because it exists outside of performance entirely. For Archie, the experience unfolds differently in the immersive world of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, where he encounters Darth Vader and stormtroopers. These figures, so deeply embedded in global pop culture, carry a different kind of energy. To adults, they represent cinematic legacy and storytelling history. To a child, they represent something closer to living fantasy, something that does not yet require separation between fiction and reality. And watching a child stand before such characters creates a subtle reminder of how imagination functions at that age. It is not something visited occasionally. It is something lived inside of. There is a quiet beauty in that, even for those observing from the outside. It reminds us of a time when stories did not feel like entertainment, but like worlds we could step into without hesitation. And yet, beneath the joy of these moments, there is another layer that quietly shapes everything. This is not only a family day out. It is part of a larger life that has been intentionally rebuilt away from inherited structure and expectation. Harry and Meghan are not only parents in this narrative. They are individuals navigating a life that sits between visibility and privacy, between public curiosity and personal intention. Every choice they make exists within that tension. Every shared moment becomes part of a wider interpretation, whether they intend it or not. And yet, within these images, there is a sense that they are actively choosing presence over performance, experience over explanation. Meghan's Instagram post, shared without elaborate commentary, reflects that same tone. A collection of moments, not a narrative. A glimpse, not a declaration. And in a world where stories are often constructed through over-explanation, this simplicity feels almost deliberate. Among the images, Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, appears alongside the family, grounding the experience in something generational and deeply human. A grandmother sharing time with her grandchildren in a space built for joy. There is also a playful moment captured where Mickey Mouse appears to humorously engage with Doria in a staged gesture that resembles a light-hearted proposal, adding a layer of warmth and humour to the day. These are not grand events. They are small, human interactions, yet they carry emotional weight precisely because of their simplicity. The timing of the visit adds another subtle dimension. It arrives around Mother's Day, a period already associated with reflection on family and care, and shortly after Archie's 7th birthday. Meghan marked the occasion with a quiet message, 7 years later, a phrase that carries more emotional depth than its brevity suggests. In earlier images shared around the same time, Archie is seen as a newborn resting on Harry's chest, a moment that captures the very beginning of parenthood for them. And, in contrast, more recent images show him alongside his sister, reflecting the passage of time in a way that feels almost seamless, yet profoundly significant when viewed as a whole. Time in this story does not announce itself loudly. It moves quietly, shaping everything in the background while life continues forward in the foreground. Harry's reflections on fatherhood deepen this emotional layer further. Shortly after Archie's birth in 2019, he spoke about the experience with a sense of awe and humility, describing it as the most extraordinary moment of his life. He also reflected on the depth of motherhood, expressing that understanding what women go through is beyond comprehension. In that reflection, what becomes visible is not the institution or the title, but the transformation of a man into a father experiencing love in its most immediate and grounding form. It is in moments like these that the public image of Harry and Meghan often feels incomplete. Because beyond commentary and headlines, what remains is a family trying to create something simple. A childhood for their children that is rooted in presence, warmth and normality as much as their circumstances allow. And while normal is a complicated word for them, in places like Disneyland it becomes something universal. Not ordinary in the sense of invisible, but human in the sense of shared experience. A child meeting a princess. Another encountering a figure from a galaxy far away. A grandmother laughing with a beloved character. Parents watching quietly as their children step into moments of joy that will likely remain with them long after the day has ended. And within all of it, something quietly consistent emerges. A family choosing joy in a world that often demands interpretation. A family choosing presence in a life that is constantly observed. A family choosing to exist in moments without turning them into statements. And perhaps that is why these images resonate so widely. They reflect something familiar beneath the surface of fame, something that belongs to everyone regardless of status or circumstance. Because behind every public identity there is a private life that looks far more ordinary than the world imagines. A life made up of small moments, shared laughter, and memories that do not require explanation to be meaningful. So, when we step back from the headlines and look at what is actually being shown, what remains is not a narrative of distance or spectacle, but something softer and more grounded. A family walking through a theme park. A child meeting characters they once only saw in stories. A parent watching quietly as childhood unfolds in real time. And perhaps that is where the deeper meaning of this moment lives. Not in what it says about royalty, but in what it reveals about family itself. Because, in the end, whether one lives in a palace or far beyond its walls, the essence of these moments remains the same. Time passes, children grow, and memories are made in the spaces between everything else.